I light this chalice with these words. Open our eyes to see what is beautiful. Open our minds to learn what is true. Open our hearts to love one another.
And if you'll join me in the Affirmation of Government that's printed in your program. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other. And our speaker today is Glen Hooks, who is no stranger to UCLR. He's been around here for a long time, and we're very happy he's here today. He's a native Arkansan and policy manager for Audubon Delta. That's one of the reasons we've kind of been featuring birds this morning. He spent almost 20 years working on environmental, climate, and energy issues, and he has a degree from Hendrix and a law degree from the Bowen School of Law. And he's just spent a lot of time concerned and working for the environment, many years with the Sierra Club. And we're just glad he's willing to spend some time with us this morning. So Glen, it's all yours.
Well, good morning. Thank you for inviting me to be here with you today. It's always a bit of a homecoming to come back to UCLR. As Debbie mentioned, I have some ties here. I was a member back in the 90s. I was even married by a former UU minister. Some of you old heads may remember Jean Rickard. She married us. The marriage didn't take, but it's probably more my fault than Jean's, for sure. But I have a lot of fond memories of this congregation, and even at this moment, I carry a memory of this year's Buffalo River float trip when I slammed my thumb in the car door. It got completely black, so, UCLR, I've quite literally carried you with me on my journey for the last 4 or 5 months, but longer in here. You guys are definitely my people, for sure. So I'm here this morning to talk a bit about activism, and specifically environmental activism here in the natural state that we all call home. I'm a native Arkansan, as Debbie mentioned. I'm a product of Gravel Ridge, Arkansas. Some of you know where that is. I was born and raised here, as were my 2 sons. And this is a special place to me. Protecting Arkansas and keeping her as a wonderful, lovely place matters to me. And that's why I do the kind of work I do for Audubon. We focus on clean energy and climate work through the lens of birds and bird habitat. And I think back to growing up here in this wonderful but complicated state. I've been here a long time, and our people are loving people, but they're nativist, and they're compassionate, and they're fearful, and somehow they're simultaneously proud, but with a reflexive inferiority complex, and we're complicated, right? I think that's fair to say. We are a state that produced both Orville Faubus and Daisy Bates, Johnny Cash and Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Irish Dement and Schoolhouse Rock's Bob Dorough, a Unitarian, right? Remember when Bob came? I was excited to sing with him that day. Levon Helm and Al Green and Louis Jordan and Charles Portis and Helen Gurley Brown, Mike Huckabee and Bill Clinton from the same Arkansas town, William Fulbright and Sam Walton and the Heifer International. And let's not forget Glen Campbell, the pride of near Delight, Arkansas, for whom I am proudly named. Right. Growing up in Arkansas, my heroes were David Pryor, Dale Bumpers, and Jimmy Carter. I suppose I've always been a liberal, even as a kid, even before I knew about labels or what any of that kind of thing meant. And as a young member of this church in my 20s, one of my favorite things about the UUs were your 7 principles. They're right out front. This denomination said, hey, this is what we're about. And so may I take a minute just to review them? They're short, but they're meaningful to me, and I've always kept them with me. The first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. The second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. The third principle, acceptance of one another. and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. The fourth principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. The fifth principle, which is one of my favorites, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. The sixth principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And the seventh principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. So as a young Arkansas liberal, every bit of this spoke to me. Let's be kind to each other. Let's be accepting of each other. Let's be open-minded while we search for truth together with the goal of peace and justice for all. And wait, so what's that last one again, the seventh one? Respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. I mean, right on, UUs. Let's respect the earth and take care of her. That's a big one for me. Now, I know that Unitarian Universalists are famously independent-minded. And everybody has their own take on things. I sometimes tell people that when they ask me about the Unitarian Universalist Church, I say with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, I don't think there are two people in this church who believe the same thing, right? Everybody's got their own take on things. My take on reading these principles collectively together, I view them as a call to action, right? Open-minded, tolerant people of conscience and principle are my kind of people, for sure, but especially those who put those principles into action. There's a fairly well-known Jack Kerouac quote from his book On the Road. He says, quote, "The only people for me are the mad ones, the ones who are mad to live, mad to talk, mad to be saved, desirous of everything at the same time. The ones who never yawn or say a commonplace thing, but burn, burn, burn like fabulous yellow Roman candles, exploding like spiders across the stars. And in the middle, you see the blue center light pop, and everybody goes, ah," right? End quote. Ditto all that, Jack Kerouac. But when I'm talking about the only people for me, I'll add in those who get up and make things happen. So given all those 7 principles, and given all that about Arkansas, and all that about Jack Kerouac, I want to talk about activism today. What is it? I think it's pretty basic. It's your principles plus action. It's great to be an informed citizen. It's outstanding to keep up with issues. It's fantastic to read and to listen and to have opinions and to share those opinions with our friends who believe the same things that we do, right? I have a group of kind of rabidly political friends that I've grown up with, and one of our standing jokes is, hey, let's all get together tonight and violently agree with each other, right? There's nothing I enjoy more than that, but it's not enough. It's not enough to know things. It's not enough to believe things. It's not enough to just commiserate about the state of the world with people in your own bubble or your own echo chamber. You gotta have some action. Gotta have some activism. So what am I talking about? Specifically, it's fine for me to say, hey, everybody, do some activism. You all go, yeah, but what does it mean? How do you get started? How do you do it in a meaningful way that actually produces some results? For the last 30 years, it's weird to say that out loud, I've been involved in activism in some form or fashion. Everything from political campaigns to working for groups like the ACLU and Planned Parenthood and environmental groups like Audubon and Sierra Club before that. It is exhilarating, maddening, crushing, fulfilling work, sometimes all exactly the same time. I've seen hundreds or maybe thousands of activists who are working their hearts out for their beliefs, and there's nothing that's more inspiring than helping train and equip people to make a difference in their own communities, to help them both find their own voice and the tools to amplify that voice to create positive change. It's exciting. I've also seen tons of really well-meaning, passionate people spin their wheels, waste their energy, and become disillusioned and burn out really fast because they don't have a plan. This kind of work can be, and often is, utterly overwhelming. The problems we're trying to solve are immense. Global warming, right? Save the planet? Thwart an existential crisis that quite literally endangers the future of humankind? Yeah, no big deal, right? It's easy. We all know why we should be activists, and any number of speakers far more inspiring than me can lift your spirits and spark your soul to activism. But maybe my role today is less about lofty inspiration and more about being practical and effective. So instead of the why, let's talk a little bit about the how. Now, here are 3 of my thoughts on how to become a lifelong and effective activist. The first one is to pick an issue. And notice that I said an issue, right? How many incredible and worthy causes are there out there? Right off the top of your head, you could say hunger and environment and reproductive justice and immigrant rights and the death penalty and public education and transgender rights and racial justice. Any one of these things are worthy causes to spend all your activist energy on. They're giant issues, each one of them. But you, and I can't fix them all by myself. You can care about them all. Pick one to be your activist focus. As a young man, I was once talking to Senator David Pryor, and he said something to me that I never forgot. He said the secret to success in Washington was, out of the thousands of issues that Congress deals with, to pick one or two issues and become an absolute expert on those issues. Pay attention to everything else, of course, right? But know your issues inside and out. Senator Pryor, if some of you remember, focused a lot on aging issues. That was his big deal. And he spent his energy on improving areas like Social Security and prescription drug prices. He became a recognized and effective leader on those issues. Now, out of the tons of issues out there, my professional focus for the last 20 years or so has been environmental issues. You drill down even more, maybe I've developed a special focus on energy issues within the big area of environmental issues. And maybe drilling down even further than that, maybe I know the ins and outs of power plants more than I used to, right? I have a general knowledge of water and forestry issues, but I'm not an expert. But I will talk your ear off about how power plants are financed, or how energy markets are regulated, or how utilities make their money. I'll go on and on. That's not a threat, but it's maybe a but it's maybe a warning for the coffee hour after the service. Just know, if you ask a question, I'll probably answer you. My point is that I've found a niche, right? A place where I can be the most effective in creating positive social change for my community. Now, a lot of the work that I do, along with Lauren Waldrop, it's arcane stuff. You're sitting through some really intensely, frankly, boring meetings, right? But through that arcane work that we do, we end up with things like dirty coal-burning power plants being retired, or more solar energy being dispatched, or ratepayers saving money on their electric bills, air and water being more clean, and healthier Arkansans living better lives. That matters, right? The point is, activists are most effective when we're focused. My advice is pick your passion. The second thing I might say is that the grunt work is what really matters. I think activists, when they're getting started, they get into this after being inspired. You know, they want to right some wrongs. They want to do some good in the world. And I love that. It's my favorite thing. It's a starting point for all the positive change that has ever happened. I think we tend to think that change happens when there are huge rallies or marches or protests. My take on this, I'm here to tell you, is that nothing ever changed just because of a rally or a march or a protest. Those are not campaigns. Those are tactics within a larger campaign. Everyone knows about the Civil Rights era, right? And the famous March on Washington where the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. gave his famous I Have a Dream speech in front of 250,000 people. It's iconic. I bet if we all closed our eyes, we can play that footage in our head. We've seen a million times. It's a huge moment for the United States, huge moment for civil rights. What we don't learn enough about, I think, is all the work in the civil rights movement that led up to it, right? The years of campaigning, the danger, the voter education, the lobbying of elected officials, the phone calls and the letters, and the planning, the grunt work, right? The utterly unglamorous grunt work. I do think sometimes people get into politics and activism with a vision of endless cocktail parties and conventions and rallies and fundraising events and speeches and television interviews and testifying before Congress. And then they get confronted with just the utterly boring but incredibly important reality of the day-to-day work. I'm here to tell you that part is the most important part. The building blocks of change take time, and most of that time is talking and cajoling and educating and eating cold pizza in some office at the end of the day, just trying to get an action alert out the door, right? It's the work that matters, though, and it's the dull, sometimes thankless work that makes a real activist, in my opinion. What are you doing when the cameras aren't around? When nobody's looking? Those people, the ones that'll make 100 phone calls in a night for you, those are the real heroes to me. The last part I'll mention, my third point, we have to understand how change really happens, positive change. I think the young version of me had a lot of faith in ideas and in intellect. You know, you have this vision that in Congress and in the state legislatures, you are watching lofty rhetoric and people hashing out ideas and debating both sides and then landing on the one that makes the most sense. I think like a lot of people believe that, you know, it's the strength of your ideas and the rightness of your cause that is going to carry the day when you're talking to legislators. That is just not the case. It isn't. Ideas and passion are so important, and they're important to inspiring the public and into recruiting more activists for your cause. They're utterly important, but actually winning on an issue requires an understanding of power dynamics. It's not about the strength of your ideas or the rightness of your cause. It's about power. And what do I mean by that? What do I mean by power dynamics? I mean that all too often, an elected official votes not out of principle, but based on which side has the most power to affect her ability to get reelected. That's just real. At bottom, there's a constant calculation going on in an elected official's head. And it's something like this. No matter which way I vote on this issue, I'm going to disappoint one side. Which side has the most power to affect me negatively, right? And power is many things. Sometimes it's money for campaigns. Sometimes it's the ability to recruit an opponent to run against somebody that you're mad at. Sometimes it's just a groundswell of people from your district who will or will not vote for you next time based on how you voted on our issue. So on my side of the issues, we're historically not the side with the most money or the most raw political power, but we do have people power. And my job, stripped down to its very basics, is to build enough people power to convince elected officials that they should pay attention to us. So how do we build that power? By educating and activating enough people on our issues to make the elected officials take notice. Educating and activating, right? So I have to convince elected officials that enough people in their district care about them voting our way on an issue. Now, does that sound cynical, what I'm talking about? I hope not. It's just democracy in action, really. It's our system. Why do we have elections instead of appointments for life? It's because, theoretically, we want our elected officials to have to face voters on a regular basis. And theoretically, that means that they will vote in the best interests of their constituents because they want to get reelected. Right? So my job is making sure that they know a lot of their constituents feel a certain way on issue X and that they should vote accordingly. Right? Let me give you an example that some of you might remember. One of my favorite parts of my whole environmental career. In my early years as an environmental activist for Sierra Club, a threat emerged to the safety of our drinking water in Lake Maumelle. Some of you may remember this, right? 2005, 2006, something like that. As you probably know, Central Arkansas has some of the highest quality drinking water in the entire nation. No kidding. I mean, it really is something. But it's largely because there are significant protections to Lake Maumelle and to the surrounding watershed. Good water doesn't just happen accidentally. But at any rate, a large corporation that owned a lot of land in the area wanted to make changes to those protections that would enable more real estate development in the watershed around Lake Maumelle. That was going to lead to significant pollution and deterioration of our drinking water. I knew we had to work on this issue. I knew we had to stop this threat. Well, one day a visitor showed up at my office. She said she'd been gardening in her yard. She heard us on the radio talking about this. She got up out of the muck, as she said, and she came to talk about it. As she described it herself, she said she was just a mom. Can't say that right, but those are her words, to be clear. But she knew that something needed to be done. So we did something, right? We put together a plan, and we recruited allies, and we made thousands of phone calls. And we worked over legislators, and we went to endless meetings. We won some in venues, and we lost some in venues. And we faced a team of 17 professional lobbyists at the Capitol with our side of parents and grandparents and regular folks. And you know what? We won. We won. We stopped that negative polluting change from happening, and Lake Maumelle remains protected. I think it's a beautiful story of a mom rising out of her garden and saving her community, right? If it was a movie, I would watch it, right? But it wasn't a movie. I'm here to tell you that we didn't win on the strength of our ideas. We won because we recruited thousands of people to contact their legislators and show up at the Capitol and write letters and harass elected officials into doing the right thing. If ordinary people hadn't become loud, well-organized activists, our legislators could have very easily and comfortably sided with the corporation with little to no personal political risk for themselves. We changed the power dynamic is what I'm trying to say. and we saved our drinking water. With some notable exceptions, I think it's rare that politicians do the right thing just because it's the right thing to do, right? There's a power dynamic calculation at work here, and shifting that power dynamic is essentially the real way to make change. Shifting that power dynamic requires lots of grunt work from lots of activists, right? There you go. Right. Grunts and activists. Good. Very good. So, in sum, I want to say this loudly and clearly. The world needs activists. Arkansas needs activists. Little Rock needs activists. Your neighborhood needs activists. It's easy to get discouraged. It's easy to get overwhelmed. It's easy to get paralyzed into doing something or doing nothing because you can't do everything. Fight your way out of that. Pick an issue. For me, it's environmental issues, and I'd welcome your volunteer activism at Audubon anytime. But if that's not your bag, what do you care about the most? Figure that out. Call up an organization to say those 4 little words we all love to hear. How can I help? Right? There is a real and tangible joy in activism. It's putting your values into action in your own community and standing up for yourself. It is absolutely my drug of choice. Okay? There are many activists in this congregation. I see you out there. And I see you out there in the world, right? As Unitarian Universalists, as Americans, as Arkansans, I'll close today by inviting everyone to get into activism. Our world, our country, our community, and our souls are calling for people of conscience to take meaningful action. I hope you'll answer that call. Thank you for your kindness and your attention this morning.
Go out into the world in peace, have courage, hold on to what is good, return to no person evil for evil, strengthen the faint-hearted, support the weak, help the suffering, honor all beings. And I ask Monica to come up and extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of commitment, or the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Please join us in Thompson Hall for cake and coffee to celebrate our new members, and then, as Glen said, go out there and do something to make it happen. Thank you.